Hi, everybody. This is Gad Saad. It's never not the right time to have wonderful conversation with the folks, even if it's Easter weekend. Dennis Neal, I'm going to introduce you formally, but first, I want to extend a welcome. Thank you for being on the show.
It's so great to see you, and I appreciate this opportunity.
Oh, thank you. Okay, let me just read the official media kit that I received in terms of who you are. Dennis Neal is an award-winning journalist, media strategist, advisor to senior executives, and the host of the What's Bugging Me podcast, which I've not been invited to yet, but I won't hold that against you. Hosted by the Ricochet Network. He was an anchor of CNBC and at Fox Business Network after serving as a senior editor at the Wall Street Journal and managing editor of Forbes. He helped write Wealth Management, a Wall Street Insider on the dirty secrets of financial advisors and how to protect your portfolio by Ed Butowski. Neil lives in New York City. Am I missing anything before we drill down into?
No, and my gosh, we probably run out of time for the interview. Thanks
All
so
right.
much. And by the way, I record my interview for my podcast every Wednesday, and I'd be honored to have you on. Guys out there who are listening to this, I want you to know I've followed this guy, okay, for 2 or 3 years. I've just been in all of his tweets. He's so brave and courageous at a time when polls show that 40% of Americans, the boldest people in the world, 40% are afraid to post on social media because they might get canceled. And this man, he talks the talk and he walks the walk. And I've always tried to do that. And this man has 1.1 million followers, and I have about 66,000. So I am in awe of him, and I'm so honored to be here. And man, if I can get you any Wednesday just to come on and talk about what's bugging you, that's a standing invitation. And then one day I shall owe you a favor.
Thank you so much. Well, today what we want to talk about is this beauty right here, the leadership genius of Elon Musk with a beautiful sort of background
It's a
portfolio.
gorgeous cover shot. Didn't HarperCollins do a great job? That kind of dark figure, especially now. At first I thought, oh my gosh, this is great timing. He's controversial. Controversy sells books. And yet I've been told that the sales are disappointing. And I suddenly thought, is this because half the population has been brainwashed into hating a man that is probably the best thing to happen to America, one of them in 100 years? It's
Oh,
so sad.
absolutely. And I mean, I want to drill down in terms of how you decide. Yeah. When did you first say this is a book that I need to write? So let's start there. And
Yeah.
what was the process by which I think the book is broken up into sort of 11 leadership
Lessons.
lessons. Uh,
11
let,
lessons of Elon. I
let,
love alliteration.
let's start with
Yeah.
what led you to write the book?
Inspiration.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, all right. So when I was an anchor a decade ago at Fox Business, I remember hearing these couple young gals outside my office talking about this guy because one, I'm a producer there, and now she's a very senior executive at another network. Said, "Oh, my girlfriend is on a yacht with this billionaire guy, this PayPal billionaire, Elon Musk." And I thought that sounds like a cologne. And that was my first time ever hearing about him. And I was just so fascinated that 1 degree of separation removed from me through this producer was a woman who's kind of partying with this guy. Started watching him then. Then cut to years later, a very talented editor in charge of the Broadside Books imprint at HarperCollins. I worked with him on Lou Dobbs, the late Lou Dobbs's book, and he ends up sending an email one day simply saying, "Do you know of a business writer somewhere who could do a management book, lessons from Elon Musk?" And I kind of thought, well, yeah. And within a weekend, I came up with a proposal. And that's for anyone out there who wants to write a book, thinking about it. I once had a guy tell me, he said, you take a weekend to write a 10,000 word proposal, laying out the book, the ideas, the chapters, the flow. If you can finish the weekend doing that, that means that you really want to write this book. If you never get around to it, it's because you really don't want to write it. Well, this proposal was ready like that. Those 11 lessons with some help from the editor, Eric Nelson, came into vision. And I just had a criticism from a friend of a friend. He read it and he told my friend, frankly, I don't see what's so special. All of these 11 lessons are lessons that every, executive should follow. And I just thought, thank you. Thank you very much. That would be good. And they are good lessons. But what I think is that I could double sales of this book. And that is why we are here. To get this book on the New York Times bestseller list in defense of Elon, in the New York Times, which hates Elon. And we could double sales if I can tell enemies out there if you want to work against this guy, this book will show you how he operates. He's got, for example, 2 lessons going on, 3 lessons of the 11 that are involved in Doge. Lesson 2 is reduce, 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 cut back everywhere on everything. We have a $40 billion a year storage industry in this business where we store stuff 5 miles from our home that if we really needed it, it would be here. But instead, we're paying to not throw it out. Throw it out. He does that with Teslas, which have 10,000 parts compared with 40,000 in a Ford. He did it with SpaceX, reduced it down to stainless steel and fuel. Doing it at Doge. Another lesson: the highest nail gets pounded down first. So strap on a helmet. Elon doesn't shrink from controversy. He says, bring it. And lesson 4, tease your critics and torture your enemies. And man, Elon does that with alacrity, doesn't he?
Indeed. Well, you may or may not know I've gotten to know Elon personally, and we've communicated many times. We've met in person. We
See,
have.
I haven't.
Yeah.
I've
Well,
had
there you
one
go.
response to an email, just one. And I feel like Wayne's World, where he looks at that guitar in the window and says, yes, one day I will have him. He will be mine.
Hey,
I'm so envy that.
you know what I'm hoping for, Dennis? That I might actually be able to finish a sentence without you interrupting me. You think that's
I
going to
so
be possible?
apologize. So sorry. I'm so
I'm
sorry.
kidding. Don't worry. Listen,
I'm over revving.
I'm
I'm over.
Lebanese. I'm Lebanese, so you've got to be able to ride with the jabbing. Don't worry about it.
Yes.
No, but what I was gonna say is I've gotten to know him personally, and knowing him personally, uh, it frustrates me to see all of the nonsense that is spewed about him. Because once you know someone personally, you feel as though he's owed, not that he needs my protection, but for somebody to stand up. I was going to say, as someone who, okay, you don't know him personally, but you wrote this book about him, do you get offended to see that here we've got this, treasure? He's not an American treasure, he's a world treasure who is trying to always do the good thing, the right thing, and yet he is so maligned. Does that piss you off?
It really does. It offends me for a couple reasons. And number one is it's that old cliche, that old saying, no good deed goes unpunished. And I'm so sorry to see that come true. But more than that, because I was with CNBC and Fox and Wall Street Journal and Forbes, I love journalists and I respect journalists, and I did for a long time. And today, many of them I don't recognize at all. And what they've done to this man and how they've made him the enemy simply because he allied with Trump because he was truly worried about our nation. And it's just appalls me that the media could side against him like that. They've turned from watchdogs who we at least tried to hide what our bias was into liberal lapdogs who just ply the Democrat agenda, most of them. And I'm so sorry to see it because Trump broke them.
Do you think that your having written this book is going to ensure that you're not invited to the cool kids parties anymore?
It may, but I never have been, so that's okay.
Why is
I've
that?
been on the B list, you know.
Why? Why?
Um, I don't know because I am anyone who sees me, they would know this guy's dying to be on the A list. He's desperate for the approval of strangers. Anyone who takes a full time job in television is desperate for the approval of strangers. But I don't know what you know what it is, the difference is? Because when I went to the Wall Street Journal at the start of my career, and I was from the University of Florida, and everyone around me in the New York office, the home office, was from Princeton and Yale and Harvard. And they
I
are
didn't
too
hear you
manner born.
mention Cornell, which is my alma
There
mater.
you go. Okay. And they were from Cornell as well. All these Ivy Leaguers. And they have a sense of entitlement that things just come to them because they deserve them. And a guy like me who came from a lower middle class upbringing and just my mom raising me for most of that time, uh, we don't ever feel like we deserve or are entitled, and we have to fight and scrap for every little step ahead that we get. And I think those of the Ivy League, they smell that desperation in me. And so I've never been quite invited into their circle.
It's actually very refreshing that you're very open about some of these things, right? Because most people would have the reflex to not share that,
Right.
out loud. And the fact that you do actually speaks to the fact that you're probably ultimately quite confident about your abilities, right? Because it takes a lot of confidence to be self-deprecating. And so screw those Ivy Leaguers. You're doing well. You're writing a book on Elon Musk. Let's put it back. Go out there and buy this book. tell us, how did you decide on why 11 lessons? Why not
Right.
10? Why not 12?
Yeah. So 10's cliche and it's two Letterman, right? Seven would be a better number. Seven is a wonderful prime number. It's a lucky number. It's in dice games. So seven would be good, but it's not quite long enough. But then the one great writing technique I have, and this is my fourth book. It's the first one I've done on my own. The one great writing technique I have is alliteration. So 11 works so well with lessons and Elon, 11 lessons of Elon. And they work so well together. For example, lesson one is the most bizarre one because it says that Elon may really truly believe that we could be living inside a
A
vast
simulation.
computer simulation right now that's so advanced that we just have no idea that it's real. And you think it's ridiculous, but then you realize, well, 10,000 years from now, actually, that's not impossible to perceive, that to imagine. But then we realize the universe is almost 14 billion years old. And that means that there would be 1.4 million 10,000 year stretches. So to Elon, the thought we've gone almost 1.4 million stretches without achieving that yet somewhere in the universe seems impossible. So it could be very true. And that means how do we know? Well, then comes along lesson two, reduce, reduce, reduce. There's a physicist I interviewed in that lesson who has created a new law. He's a fascinating interview. You would love him. The second law of infodynamics. And it says that while the rest of the universe is given to entropy and complexity and more trash, information in our universe is constantly reducing itself. And he noticed this in nature. COVID, the original version versus 20 generations later, it kept shedding DNA characters. And scientists used to think that this shedding was mathematical error. And along comes the physicist who says, no, no, this is nature's efficiency. They're doing this on purpose. The organism does the same old stuff with far fewer letters and characters. And he says, and all through nature, they're constantly reducing information required. Why? And then he suddenly thought, if this were a simulation, they have figured out it would take 45 planet Earths of computing power to do a perfect simulation, okay? And if this were a simulation, you'd want to cut down on information and storage as much as possible everywhere. So the lesson works. And then lesson 11, Elon says,
I'm looking at the lessons. Go on. I'm listening.
Elon says the most likely outcome in life
Is the
is
most
the most
ironic one.
ironic one, the most opposite of what you tried to make happen or what you thought would happen, or it's the most entertaining one. Well, that hooks into the simulation because think about it. A physicist who first came up, Bostrom, in 2001, came up with a seminal paper on the simulation. And he said, if there is a simulation, the guys who are running it, they wouldn't do it to come up with boring outcomes. They're doing it for entertaining outcomes. And so that kind of teaches you to live your life bigger, louder, fuller. It all might be a game anyway.
Right. Well, I mean, there's so many things I want to jump off from what you just said. Number one, speaking of physicists, by the way, what's the name of the physicist that you're mentioning?
I've now forgot it because you asked. Hang on.
Okay, just so that we can.
But I just love the guy, and I spent an hour and 2 hours on Zoom with him. He was so wonderful.
I'm thinking.
Vopson. I just remembered it. Vopson. Vopson.
Okay, I'll check him out. Well,
VOPSON.
here's another guy you might want to check out. I'm giving him some free publicity. Do you
Yeah,
know David Deutsch?
I do not, but I
David,
love physicists.
yeah, well, David Deutsch is a gentleman who recently came on my show twice. He came back to back for we had such a great first conversation that we ended up having a second conversation. And to me, he epitomizes what a real intellectual should be like. Because one of the great disappointments in my long academic career now, I've been a professor for 31 years, very difficult for me to imagine that that's true, is that many professors are actually not intellectuals, right? They're hyper specialists. They know their small restrained field, but ask them to talk about art history or to talk about whatever geopolitics. If they only know physics or chemistry, that's all they're comfortable talking about.
Right.
David Deutsch was certainly not that, albeit he is a quantum computing and quantum mechanics guy. So he certainly has the scientific imprimatur. So, but what I was going to go back to one of your earlier lessons where you say, kind of tease or go after
Torture your enemies. Yeah.
your enemies. So I think I would put that lesson as part of a greater mindset. So in the parasitic mind, my 2020 book in
An
the
incredible book.
Thank you so much. In the last chapter, I talk about activate your inner honey badger. And the honey badger, of course, is a ferocious, fierce animal. And I recently released a clip on my channel where I said, Here is what's the greatest commonality across Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and Joe Rogan is that they are true honey badgers in their own domains. They all don't give an F. So would it be fair to say that encapsulated in one or more of your lessons is the honey badger? I don't
Exactly.
give enough.
Yeah, that lesson three, right before lesson four, which says, "Hey, highest nail gets pounded down. Strap on a helmet." And, instead of our fleeing controversy, instead of our fleeing reprisal, maybe we should say, "I don't give an F," like you say, and that's what Elon does. And maybe it turns out greatness
Yeah.
requires being willing to not give an F.
Well, and I think so. I often mention this, maybe once a month, I'll put out a tweet on this and I'll say, look, the great people of history, whether they be negative forces, Hitler, or they be positive forces, are not equivocators. They're not fence sitters. They see a vision and they go full throttle in, right? So, your very kind words at the start of our show when you were talking about sort of my public engagement, I can't be anything other than exactly what I am, which is if I were to modulate a millimeter of what I want to say, I would feel fraudulent. And therefore, I just go full throttle and I don't give an F.
Right. And that's really worked for you. Whereas for me, in 2014 when I left Fox with 15 minutes notice and they had a security guard escort me out of the building. Literally, I almost fainted. I had to hold up a wall. I waited for those offers to pour in because by golly, and this guy, he says what he really feels. None came. I mean, nothing,
But
nothing.
why did you get, if I don't know if you're allowed to speak about it or not, but what led to your very
Leaving.
unceremonious departure
So
from
because my friend, someone I just adore and admire so much, Maria Bartiromo,
right?
took a huge career risk. She was so hurt at CNBC because they were going to try to, kind of start to phase her out perhaps or cut her salary. So boom, she risks everything and she leaves that network that she was part of for 20 years and goes to Fox Business, which was the second also ran and wasn't yet big. And the very day she shows up for work and she comes through the turnstile, she says, "Dennis, I'm so sorry. You don't blame me, do you?" She knew already I was being fired that day, and I didn't know. And because I knew I was losing my anchor chair, and they're shaking up the schedule to make room for Maria. But it turns out they had to make room in the budget. She's coming in costing 6 million a year reportedly, and they needed to cut 1 million. So cut me and two other producers. And the three of us, 6 months earlier, had been in the office of one of the senior executives bitterly having an argument among the two of them against me, and then we all three were taken out together on the same day 6 months later, and suddenly I'm thinking I like those two guys more than I knew. um,
Oh.
so,
Have
so
you
they had to
have
cut the
you
budget.
have you retained a working relationship with Fox? Do you ever appear on any of their shows, or you've
Well, you know what?
disappeared?
It's interesting because why is it that my two alma maters, Fox Business and CNBC, have yet to have me on air to talk about this book? At CNBC, it would be because we're liberal and Elon's a bad man. At Fox, I have heard the PR department, the most feared corporate PR department in the land. I've talked to media reporters, they're terrified of this PR department. And apparently they have a rule saying if you've been an anchor or on the network, you can't come back. Now, I imagine they break that for somebody somewhere, sometime, but they haven't broken it for me yet. And when I was there, I couldn't even get them to meet me for lunch. And I was
Oh
taken to
no.
the principal's office 13 times for tweets that they thought were too controversial.
Oh, if when I hear stories like that and I think about how I go about my life, I probably wouldn't make it there by 9 o'clock Monday morning. I wouldn't lie.
Yes. And I've been wanting to ask you because I see your stuff, and it's one thing for any person of repute, to be doing the stuff you're doing and to be that bold and that blunt. But for a professor in academia, you must feel like an outsider and a pariah all the time. And I always have felt like that. And when I was writing about Elon Musk, I felt like that Elon probably, I just got this sense that he wants to be loved. You see him on stage at those rallies and he's jumping up and his belly's showing because the t-shirt's not long enough as he's raising, and he's just so happy to be loved. And I think all of us have that and want that in basic nature. It's just that some of us work a lot harder to win that love than others, and that is what drives us.
Well, and I think so. I mean, I've been in very close proximity to President Trump. I was invited to an event at Mar-a-Lago. He was maybe 5 meters from me, but I didn't get the pleasure of actually interacting with him. So anything that I'm saying is speculative in that I don't really know him personally. But I feel that one of the reasons why Trump reacted often the way that he did in his first term, much less so in his second term, is that he just wanted the love and appreciation and credit for doing things, right? Now, part of that comes from a sense of slight narcissism, but we any of us who are going to be in the public eye want to be patted on the back saying, "Atta boy, you did well." It's human nature, so that's
Yeah.
not so weird or creepy. But the more that he didn't get it, then the more sort of indignant he would become, and then
Yes.
that would come across as though he's not being presidential. The second term, that monkey is really off his back. Guess what? You threw everything at me, and I still came out winner. And
Yes.
so he just seems a lot more at peace with his existential reality. Am I right here?
Oh, you're so right. And the other thing is his winning 77 point something million votes, more than Kamala, his winning all seven swing states, his winning both houses of Congress, his winning 312, was it electoral votes, something like 42 more than required to win. He's feeling more loved now.
Yeah.
He's lost that anger of feeling, because I thought about this one time. Imagine what it was like for him in his first term. Imagine if he's utterly innocent, and he was, of all Russiagate stuff, and all of these thousands of stories saying this stuff about you, and it's not true. And it must have been like a Twilight zone episode for him. I'll just add to that.
Sure.
I met the man twice before he ever ran for president, one on one. One time, and Stockholm syndrome, where you're taken
Of course.
hostage, you start to identify. There's some other kind of syndrome. There must be a name for it, and you may know it, where you can meet the worst man in history, but if he's nice to you personally and polite, I will defend him for years to come because of my personal experience. Now, the first time I bet at the Today Show and Manjana Forbes, I do a hit, and he's the apprentice. He's in the green room, and I'm about to leave because back in that day they gave you a car to take downtown instead of you having to get on the subway. And suddenly they say, "Wait, can you? We'll get the car to wait." Donald Trump is in the green room. He wants to introduce himself to you. I go in there. And oh, and have you met Rich Dad, Poor Dad author? Here, this is my friend. As if he's not enough alone for me to meet. Okay, right away, I'm a fan. Then a couple months later, I'm at dinner with a billionaire, six people. Trump comes up, sits next to me for the better part of an hour, and he goes around the table and he doesn't talk about himself once. And he asks each person their story. And each of us, when we went home that night to our partner or something, "You won't believe it. I got to sit with Donald Trump." And you ask, "And what did he say?" "Well, he asked me about this, and I told him about that." Yeah, I already know that, but what did he say? So this guy was so winning, and I just defended him for years based on that personal experience.
It's funny what you just mentioned about that sort of, let's call it the syndrome of you could take a bad person. Not that Donald Trump is a bad person, but you could take any person as long as there's a personal affinity. Suddenly,
Personal experience, yeah.
right. Guess who just experienced it? Super
Bill
liberal
Maher.
Bill Maher, exactly.
He's getting red pilled before our eyes. He so wanted to go there and be snide, but instead you end up liking the guy, and the guy's been a salesman all of his life, right? He wants to be liked.
But what disappoints me in Bill Maher is the fact that he didn't have the sort of personal acuity, if I can put it that way, to have extrapolated that Donald Trump would have had those qualities, even though he hadn't met him yet. So, for example, when I often judge politicians, even though I haven't met any of them, I always use the would I like to have a beer with them, even though I'm not much of a beer drinker, right? And so, George Bush, I think I could really have, I mean, he just strikes me like a cool guy. Bill Clinton, yes, he pretends that he's listening to me, but he's creepy because he's looking for who's the hot girl that's passing in his peripheral vision. Barack Obama is a smug malignant narcissist. And I'm not talking politics. I'm truly basing this on what I'm reading from their personal cues.
Yeah.
There is no way in hell I could have not predicted that sitting down with Donald Trump, you would end up liking him more. And yet it took Bill Maher to have personal interaction with him to be able to come to that conclusion.
And that is because libs, libwit, dimwit, Democrats have been so poisoned, haven't they, about this man? And when all you see in all of the media coverage is bad man, bad man, bad man, that's what you end up believing. And it's so unfortunate because it doesn't have to be this way. I really thought things would change after he won this time around. I thought that the Democrats would come back to the table and say, okay, you crazy. Let's go ahead and let's work together on a few things here. But no, they've taken up the permanent opposition. Trump has brilliantly pushed them into opposing some of the most rational, common sense policies and instead supporting some of the most radical, ridiculous things, using taxpayer money for prisoner sex change operations. I mean, it just gets more and more bizarre, doesn't it?
Right. When you first, let me put it up again. Let's get those sales going. Buy this book, people. By the way, just for full disclosure, Eric Nelson is my editor for my next book, Suicidal Empathy. Phenomenal guy.
Wow.
As a matter
You're
of fact, what just for you, well, anyways, let me first finish this
you're
point,
very lucky.
and then I'll,
He's great.
yeah, yeah, he's wonderful. Uh, when you first sat down to write this book, had the Elon Musk, Donald Trump link been officially made, or this was pre that?
No, this is before this is way before the assassination attempt. The assassination attempt was the thing that switched Elon over from I'm supporting him privately to I'm getting on stage with this guy. When he saw that, and I was watching live at the time as well, and I cried when I saw him get up and do that and say fight. I mean, I was so moved by that. I'm even moved now when I think of it and how the media managed to memory hole and bury that story and that moment. Oh my gosh, they're part of the great government psyop. It's just horrible. And Elon, he has done this at great personal expense, at great expense to me. I own Tesla stock. I watched it fall from 450 down to 220 just on political backlash because how dare he come out and speak up. And so he's done this at great personal cost. He's had two assassination attempts over the past year or two, and yet he's done it anyway because he really felt like we're in trouble. I have an essay on what's bugging me this week it's out or last week about creation and destruction. I live right across the street from a block long construction site. They tore down a jail that had been there since 1957 and they tore it down to build a new one. Okay. Well, it took them a few months to tear that sucker down, all 15 floors of it. It's not going to be built up till 2029. It is so much easier to destroy things than it is to build it up. And our country, 250 years of working on building the best nation on earth that the world has ever seen. And we almost lost it in a matter of two presidencies. Obama in 8 years and Biden in 4 years. The nation was going crazy, and Elon felt like, I better stand up. And had he not bought the X platform, and by the way, a huge risk. Another rule says bet on yourself and take on huge risk because what the hell? He bet 25 billion, I think it was, of his own money on that acquisition. No one does that. In Silicon Valley, you use other people's money, right? And a judge in Delaware forced him to go through with that deal. He didn't want to do it. But that deal changed everything because now you can't cheat on elections because it'll show up on X. They've got video of somebody doing something. Now, X was the great equalizer that gave the other voice an actual megaphone instead of crushing it the way the government did in the Twitter files expose. And the media buried that story too. That's why they're mad at Elon. The media, I wrote more columns, okay, on that Twitter file scandal than the entire staffs of the New York Times and the Washington Post combined. I did a count, okay? And they buried the story. Why? Because it was only conservative voices being muzzled. But it'll be your voice next time because the Trump administration came out and requested 5,500 liberal accounts be silenced on old Twitter before Elon bought it.
Yeah, well, to your point, I wholeheartedly agree that of all the things that Elon has ever done or will ever do, in other words, I'm going to be even more bold in saying not anything that he's done, but anything that he could ever do could not be as historically as important as the purchase of Twitter. And I actually said that. You can go check it on my channel.
Uh-huh.
Probably within a few days of him having purchased what was then Twitter, I made that point because, I mean, exactly to your point. I mean, I can't even begin to fathom or imagine where we would be today. I mean, certainly my voice would be much smaller. I'm sure your voice, probably Kamala Harris would be president. We'd all
Yeah.
still be, getting taken off the thing because we say that men can't menstruate. But by the way, to your earlier point about how is it possible that I can exist within the most parasitized ecosystem called academia, you need to see my colleagues in their antipathy, their unhinged antipathy
Yeah.
toward Donald Trump. It's simply astounding. What upsets me the most, Dennis, is that many of these guys are actually psychologists. They are behavioral scientists. They teach decision making in some of the leading business schools in the world. I mean, and the reason why I know them well is because I studied and do research in psychology of decision making. So I know all of the top decision theorists. And yet those same decision theorists who are professors at universities that charge 80 and $90,000 a year for your kid to go there suddenly lose their complete ability to be rational decision makers when it comes to even finding a singular positive point about Donald Trump, which is the perfect manifestation of the parasitic mind.
And it's amazing that they're unable to step outside themselves and realize that they're being victimized by the great psyop. It's so strange. And one other thing, though, you had mentioned, I mentioned lesson 11 talks about ironic outcomes are the most likely ones. The internet was created to help rebels in terrible oppressive countries fight government. And the ironic outcome is that decades later, what it really is the platform that government uses to conduct surveillance, mass surveillance on its own people. And that's happened in the US and that's happened in the UK and everywhere else. And it is such an ironic opposite of what the internet was supposed to be.
Indeed, indeed. So tell us very briefly, what was you said this is the fourth book you've worked on, but the
The
other ones you
first, it's my own. Yeah,
right, your own. What's the reason I'm asking this question? I just told you that before coming to this chat, I was working on suicidal empathy myself. I've got my own, writing, regimen or how I go about it. What's your if you wrote a book with 11 lessons. Give us the top three lessons for aspiring authors of what they should do to hopefully be able to be contacted by Eric Nelson at
yeah.
HarperCollins to write a book.
Well, then I'd say there's lesson five. Most people are loafers, work harder than you ever have before. There's some great data in there on how little young people, how much less they work than their predecessors, how 15% of young men are utterly detached from the workforce and haven't had a paycheck in a whole year, and they spend their time playing video games. So you got to work harder. Every time someone comes to me, they want to do a proposal of a column, I say, write the column and send that. Okay, lesson six, free speech is everything. Stand up and be heard. You got to speak out. You got to say something important and sing it to the rafters. Lesson seven on the media. To hell with them. They are shameless shills. And I'm a 30-year journalist. And maybe that's one reason why some of the more liberal media haven't yet been booking me to talk about this book. But just think, if I had called it The Leadership Failures of Elon Musk, would I suddenly be everywhere in the media
Right.
and being interviewed like
Number
crazy?
one New York Times bestseller.
Yeah, I mean, look, character limit. Two New York Times or three New York Times reporters did this latest Elon book on how he's destroyed Twitter character limit. He has a limited character, and there was Breaking Twitter by the guy who did the big PayPal book. And 2 years after that acquisition, come on, man, it is the single most important media platform in the world, right? Because of its openness that everyone decried.
Well, and by the way, I often will get a blowback from fellow Jews, right? I'm Jewish, and the Jews will write to me saying, "How could you be friends with Elon and not go after him when he tolerates all these anti-Semitic accounts?" And then my answer is, Have you ever been slapped by this thing called freedom of speech? I mean, I mean, imagine the chutzpah, right? Forgive me for using a Jewish term.
Yeah, yeah.
Imagine the chutzpah whereby you're speaking to a free speech absolutist, right? I defend the right of Holocaust
Yeah,
deniers to spew their most insulting nonsense. You expect me to go to Elon and say, "Hey, Elon, can you please take out, here's the list of all of the accounts that I'd like you to take out." But in the minds of those Jewish folks that write me all this nonsense, they view freedom of speech through a consequentialist lens, right? What's wrong with you speaking to Elon so that we can get rid of hate? But then that also applies to when I criticize Islam. Then
right.
wouldn't be the Muslims be perfectly
And in
justified?
fact,
Go
it,
ahead.
it applies even more for Islam. Because let's remember that the Biden administration came out with an order protecting Islam and discouraging Islamophobia after the October 7th attacks, not for an order for anti-Semitism.
Right.
And I looked into the stats, and it turned out that anti-Semitism per 100,000 Jews was 2 to 3 times the rate of attacks of Islamophobia per 100,000
Oh, I'm
Islam.
surprised that
Okay.
it's only that. I would think it's much higher, but go ahead.
Right. And all right, so that was one thing. You had a few things to unpack, and now I've just lost it. I should
Oh,
have
that's
written
okay.
it down.
We'll come back to it. But the bottom line is that this idea that freedom of speech is great, and then you put a but. The second that you put a
Ah,
but, you're
yes.
entering the consequentialist word. But go ahead.
It turns out this group has taken for 25 years polls of Americans on their First Amendment views, free speech.
Yes.
And the latest poll, I mentioned this in the book, shows 1/3 of America believes it is more important to prevent hate speech than
Yes.
it is to preserve free speech. The First Amendment protects, literally protects hate speech, but they think 1/3. And then disturbingly, another third, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that balance. So 2/3 of America failed to realize that the First Amendment is everything. It protects all kinds of speech, and that's okay. The way to drown out that speech is not to muzzle it, it's to come up with better speech that out argues it. Let those cockroaches bathe in the sunlight and let them say their hateful things and then rip them apart with their own words. I'm just, and here's where we went down the wrong road. Okay. This phrase, harmful content, became accepted into the lexicon. And words cannot leap off a screen and smack you in the face. Only a human can do that. Blame the human who did it. Don't blame the words that he read. That's his fault. And this thought that content will harm you. Change the channel, we used to say. And it's just ridiculous. And everyone's looking for a safe space, and everyone shops for umbrage. He hurt my feelings. He said a bad thing about me. How about you not be such a baby? Last week, New York Times op-ed section, big op-ed from, I think his name's Adam Grant, organizational psychologist, far more qualified than I am. And the wrong lessons we're learning from Elon Musk because he's mean. He yells at people. And I did an essay in my podcast this week saying, you know, if you're working for one of the most amazing minds of the past century and he yells at you, maybe it's up to you to decide whether you're going to let that hurt your feelings. Maybe it's not what he says. Maybe it's how you decide to respond. And maybe you should stop being such a wussy.
I'm not surprised that that would be the conclusion that Adam Grant arrives at. I'll leave it at that and let you decide what you think I might how I might view Adam
Yes.
Grant. But anyways, by the way, he represents exactly and I'm sure I'm going to get somebody who's going to write to me, why were you mean to Adam Grant? I don't know who he is, but I certainly know of his positions. Uh, I've always said, I mean, jokingly, but I'm being jokingly only in the way that I say it, but I truly mean it, that I have discovered a new species in the animal kingdom, and they're called the invertebrate castrati, and they represent academia because it's not only that they are without testicles, both men and women, but they're also spineless. Because think about it for a second, Dennis. What's the point of tenure? Isn't tenure the institutionalized mechanism that ensures that if you are too, lacking in courage to speak, well, now you have tenure that ensures that you will be protected. So you don't even have to be a courageous person to stand up and speak
Yeah.
because you are protected by tenure. But I have never in my life seen as much of a constellation of cowards as I have in academia. And I mean, I don't say this to be irreverent or to, to be egging on my academic colleagues, but it really is true, right? I mean, I always say whenever I write a list of how to save our universities, there's always one item that says we need to train our future thinkers and leaders to be intellectual Navy SEALs, right? Navy SEALs are physically courageous. They have to be able to withstand certain physical rigor that the rest
Right.
of us can't do. Well, that's exactly what we should expect from our intellectual Navy SEALs. Boldness, right? I mean, exactly the
Yes.
kinds of traits that this guy exemplifies, right? Boldness, non-fence setter, honey badgers, but we do exactly the opposite to that in academia.
This is another one of those lesson 11 ironic opposite outcomes because academia, free expression, free ideas and thought. And yet, academia and the college campus is where I think the erosion of free speech has been the worst, where it began. The whole trend began there because there are professors on campus who are afraid to speak up if their view is anything other than lockstep Obama libwit stupidity. And it's so sad to see. And look at what happened at Columbia and now Harvard. What do you think of this Harvard thing? $50 billion endowment. And you guys are, during the COVID handouts, do you know that our government, US, gave universities $115 billion in aid? And this was, I did some research on this, triple what any loss they could have claimed because of COVID. And even though the universities shut down their campuses, and they were running super cheap and charging full tuition for online courses. They got billions of dollars. And Harvard was right there lining up with their handout, even though they have a $50 billion endowment. You know what? Screw you guys. Again, it's my whole Ivy League problem.
I'll tell you a story. I don't think I've ever shared this publicly before. So you're now threading on new territory,
I
Mr.
love it.
Journalist. You're getting exclusive. So in 1993, as I was entering my last year of my PhD at another Ivy League called Cornell, I had made it to the final cut for an assistant professorship, right? The first rank of professor at
Yeah.
Harvard Business School, which just to get to that point is
Oh, wow.
almost impossible. It's like one in a million. And so I was very keen on it because, Harvard Business School, would sort of be a dream job, even though it would be very unlikely for most people. And certainly one who ends up having the kind of mouth and spicy pen that I have to ever have
Yes.
gotten tenure, but who knows? I remember one thing that really turned me off. Uh, Otherwise, I was completely enamored with the glory and glitz of the place. And
Yeah.
I remember I was invited to a joint meeting where I think there were 8 sections of introductory marketing class that was taught to the first year MBAs. And the 8 professors who taught those 8 sections had to get together for a coordinated pedagogy class where, I mean, they literally agree on every single syllable that's put on the board and what's because they want to create this standardized thing. And
Yeah.
right away, I thought to myself, that's not going to work with me because I am someone who operates in complete freedom, right? I mean, and
Right.
I mean, you saw it later in my career when you see me interacting with the public, right? I can't be reined in. It would completely remove any of what constitutes Gad Saad. And so even then, 32 years ago, when I went to Harvard and saw the standardized wussiness, I was like, this may not be the right place for me. You just got this as an exclusive, sir.
Wow. So you turned them down?
Well, I didn't turn them down because here's what happened. No, I wish I could have ended the story that way. Uh, so I think what I heard from inside sources that it was ultimately down to me and another person. And in a very early manifestation of DI, diversity, inclusion, equity, I heard that that person had gotten the job because she ovulates and I don't. Now,
Yep.
I can't confirm that, but that's what I had heard. So there you go. So no, I didn't turn them down. And to be honest with you, I remember when I didn't get the job, my first reaction is I was disappointed because already the salary differences between what I could have made at Harvard Business School versus
Yes.
anywhere else was quite pronounced. Not that I've ever been driven by, pecuniary pursuits, but I was a single guy. I had studied my whole life. I'm in my 20s. I'm now going to get out and get a professorship. it was hard not to be crushed by the fact that I had been rejected by Harvard, but so
You
be
know,
it.
this kind of feeling that there's this in group and I'm on the outside looking in. I think certain mavericks have that. I think Elon Musk
Yeah.
has that. I think I always have had that. Even though other people would look at me and say, "What do you mean? You've been in New York with the media for all these years. You are part of it." But no, no, I'm just not. And what happens is because you have no other choice, you're this outsider, you're this pariah. I end up identifying with it even more. I put on that jacket, and by golly, that is the suit of armor I now have. You guys wouldn't let me into the club. You forced me into this, but now I'm going to make the most of it, and I'm going to rail and call out hypocrisy. A lot of the disapproval of Elon Musk and Donald Trump, it feels like it's the cool kids in the club who, are looking outside down their nose at these outsiders who don't know how to behave,
Oh, can I interrupt you? Forgive me for
Yeah.
interrupting you. There's a great story that I tell. Well, I shouldn't say great story when I'm the one who's telling the story. So forgive that editorial faux pas. There's a story that I tell in chapter one of The Parasitic Mind, where I had been invited to, arguably one of the top two or three meccas of academia, the Stanford Business School, to give a talk, a scientific talk on, my evolutionary psychology work and so on. And the night before, the gentleman who's sort of hosting me, who's a professor in the business school, looks at me when we're out to dinner and says, "Oh, I didn't know that you'd been very very often on Joe Rogan." I said, "Oh yeah, Joe and I know each other well, and I've been many times." And so he kind of puts on exactly the smug look that you were alluding to, and he goes, "Well, at Stanford, we don't condone that." I said, "You don't condone what at Stanford?" He goes, "Well, we don't do our research so that it could be sexy enough so that we can go and talk about it on Joe Rogan." I said, "Well, I don't do that either, but doesn't it make more sense for me to be able to do research that hopefully can be exciting enough to share it with 20 million people on Joe Rogan rather than only publish the paper in a peer-reviewed journal?" And here are my exact words: "That is going to be read by your mom, your girlfriend, two reviewers and an editor, and you should have seen his face," right? That speaks exactly to what you're saying, right? Because
Yes.
it's an ego defensive strategy, right? Why is that bastard Donald Trump ascending to the highest office when I went to all the right schools and I hold the espresso with my pinky up and I speak with the progressive lisp and I have the obnoxious New York affectations of Wellesley College and so on? But yet, this brash, obnoxious, aesthetic injury is now the king of the world. If he's right, it invalidates my experience, my existence.
Well, the people with their pinky extended, they're doing that out of fear. They're doing that out of the need for conformity because they don't want to be called out. And then they see someone like Elon Musk or Donald Trump and some brash person who's not apologizing for their presence, who's not living in fear of all at all. And they they resent that. The reason women are attracted to men who make them laugh, men with a sense of humor. It's not because it shows they're smart. It's because it shows they're bold. And women, I read this someplace, this is not mine. When they see a man in a circle, social circle, willing to step up and make a joke, bring attention to themselves, only to be disdained by the others in the cool club, women kind of think, man, he's got something going on there.
Yep.
And I've always been like that. And I think it's a good way to be because we live truer to ourselves. We might get the idea of a simulation and this could be a game, so I'm going to make life as entertaining as hell if I can.
I hadn't thought about that particular signal associated with humor. I've written and I actually had a postdoc work with me at one point whose doctoral dissertation was on humor as a sexually selected trait. And
Ah,
exactly to your point, the typical argument is that humor serves as a proxy measure of intelligence. But well, I know it's not your idea, but the one that you espoused, that it actually demonstrates boldness and risk taking, especially
cockiness. Yeah.
exactly. So I like that. That's very, I do know that's, and I mentioned this earlier, self-deprecation in general and self-deprecating humor is actually a sign of confidence because when you're turning the weaponry of mockery towards yourself, by definition, you have to be someone who
Yes.
is confident in who you are. So, for example, I used to be a lot heavier at one point. Now I've lost the weight, but I could still make fun of myself and call myself a beached whale and a walrus and so on because I even
Yeah.
when I was fatter, I was very confident in my skin. So that
Yeah. It's a great point. Now, just in terms of trying to make myself interesting here and take another side of that trade, I used to do this a lot because I come across so forcefully that I felt people just looked at that guy and they think he's so arrogant. So I would undercut myself a lot and make fun of myself. Well, I'm at a party once. I've just left CNBC. They wanted to cut my salary 35%. They told me, you're just no anchor. We've decided now that we've had you here for 3 years as an anchor. And so I jumped over to Fox without having to take any pay cut. But Fox Business was such a, kind of a distant number two that I was kind of embarrassed of this change. So I'm at this wedding reception for the CEO of the IMAX big screen company, and with this really hot PR woman. She's advised Bill Gates and Bill Clinton. She's amazing. And I keep doing this. Well, it's Fox. I mean, I had to leave CNBC and I'm apologizing, kind of taking myself down. And she takes me off to the side. She says, "You've got to stop doing this." And I said, "Wait, I think most people think I'm kind of arrogant. I want to show them I'm modest." She said, "That's fine for a little bit. But at some point, if you keep undercutting yourself, they will believe you and they will take
Wow.
you less seriously because of that." And I stopped doing it quite as much. And then I took some training in mind control that was amazing. 150 hours of training changed my entire life. And I learned there that your unconscious mind, and you would know this, is like a 5-year-old child that believes every single thing you say. And so when your unconscious mind hears you say, "I'm such an idiot. I so blew that," it believes that. And
Wow.
we should be a lot kinder to ourselves. So
Did
even
you
if we're going to take ourselves down, we should do it with sweetness instead of, humiliation.
did you stay in touch with that very bold woman who had the balls to take you to the side and
Yeah.
tell you that very tough feedback?
I stayed in touch with her, but she didn't stay in touch with me because once I was no longer an anchor, once I was no longer in the official media, I had lost salience and usefulness to her. But I
Wow.
like her a lot. And the great thing is, always leave your door open. She can come back into my life anytime and I would welcome her.
I thought you were going to say when I said, "Have you stayed in touch with her?" For a moment, the romantic part of my brain said, "Not only have I stayed in touch with her, I married that woman." Apparently not. It
I
only
am a journalist who doesn't let the facts get in the way of a good story, so I may tell that story next time around in my next.
exactly. Please change the story a bit. That's a
Yeah.
white lie. It works. All right. Well, what are some projects that, if you'd like, if you feel comfortable, you'd like to share with us that are not yet public? Take this opportunity to tell us what is keeping Dennis Neal up
Yeah.
at night with excitement.
Well, I'm really building what's bugging me, my podcast.
Yes.
I'm really working on building that audience, and I'm working on a new deal with Newsmax. Newsmax is doing an extraordinary thing right now. This network has been so good to me, okay? And they are now hawking my book, The Leadership Genius of Elon Musk.
Put it up.
Order their Newsmax magazine subscription, they'll give you a free copy of my book. And Chris Ruddy, the owner of the network, told me that typically when they do this promotion for every book they give away, two more sell on Amazon. So I want to build the podcast and build the book. And I'm thinking about the next book idea. And no one can do it as well as I can. So I'll just tell you what it is. Walmart is a national treasure. Walmart has done more for poor people in this country than $20 trillion in government spending since 1964 and the supposed war on poverty. Walmart is an amazingly well-run business, and it makes other businesses even better, and has put people through college and has turned people into millionaires, and yet it's a pariah. And again, see, there's something that draws me to that kind of character. And then I wanted to go contrarian and say everything you know about this company or this person is wrong.
So basically, you'd like to write a biography of Walmart.
Yeah. You know the way Bill Bill O'Reilly has these great contemporary history books,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
assassination of Lincoln, and he just does a clip job with a ghostwriter. I want to do a series of books on business biographies, Amazon, Walmart, these heroes of capitalism and how they created what they created and what we can do and how we can borrow from that to improve our own lives. I think there's a stencil there, a template that you could work with, right? Because people want guidance. People, we want to get somewhere. There's the poet and the living lives of quiet desperation. I want to push people out of that. I think we need to live more and love harder and live louder. You know,
Well,
we only get one shot.
when that book comes out, is this going to be under the auspices of Eric Nelson?
Well, I mean, I haven't pitched it to him yet. I probably shouldn't be talking about it. But again, I feel like this is my idea. Someone else can steal it. They'll never do it as well as I will, I hope.
Exactly. There's the confidence again. Well, Eric Nelson, I'm sure he has stewarded you through a very good and successful project. People, go out and get this book. Dennis, such a pleasure to meet you. Stay on the line so we could say goodbye offline. Come back when the Walmart story is told, and I look forward to my invitation on your show. By the way, I have a series. What is it? It's called What's Bugging Me,
What's
right?
bugging me?
So I've got a series on X, like on X
Yeah.
Spaces, where I just go. It's called Things That Are Pissing Me Off. And I just get on and for like an hour, and usually I don't drop F-bombs, but this is where I'm somewhat more liberal with my
Right.
F use. And so there you go.
Nice.
I understand your frustration. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for coming on, Dennis. Talk to you soon.
I love you, man. I
Thank you,
appreciate
buddy.
it.
Thank you. Cheers.